This right here is my Sony FX3, and I absolutely love it. As someone who makes their money primarily by shooting videos, I find it hard to imagine a world without the incredibly popular Sony FX line of cameras. They absolutely changed the industry for video shooters by offering cutting-edge video recording features in compact, professional form factors that people like you and me could use. But how did we get here? To understand that, we need to look back at Sony's past. The FX camera line didn't just spring up out of nowhere. They're the product of decades of innovation, design, experimentation, and direct feedback from working filmmakers and broadcasters. So let's rewind the clock and look back at the cameras that inspired the Sony FX line. As you can probably imagine, Sony's made a lot of cameras over the years. From the Portapak systems of the late 1960s, to the U-matic, cassette-based video format of the 1970s, and then the Betacam systems of the 1980s. But our story begins in the 1990s, with the filmmaking industry on the cusp of something big: mainstream digital recording. See, in the 1990s, Sony was already a giant in the video production space, thanks to the widespread adoption of the company's tape-based video cameras, which were super popular at the time. One of Sony's most iconic professional lines from this period was the DVcam range, which included cameras like the DSR PD-150. The DSR PD-150 launched at a price point of $3,900 or $7,900 when adjusted for inflation, so it was a bit more expensive than a modern-day FX6. But FX6s, these cameras were not. The DVcam cameras were standard definition workhorses with 1/3-inch sensors and a camcorder-style body construction. They were designed to be portable, grab-and-go cameras for situations where larger cinema or broadcast cameras wouldn't work. Does that sound familiar? DV cameras like the DSR PD-150 also shared some features with modern-day Sony FX cameras, such as timecode, XLR audio input, built-in ND filters, a flip-out LCD screen, and lens stabilization technology. But that's where most of the similarities end. See, cameras in the DVcam range weren't really what you would call cinematic. They were more rugged and reliable and represented an all-in-one solution to shooting good enough professional quality video. But they still shot on tape. In the 2000s, Sony moved to tapeless video recording with their new line of professional video cameras called XDcam. There were a bunch of XDcam models, including the XDcam SD, XDcam HD, XDcam EX, and the XDcam HD 422 cameras. The difference being in the types of recording codecs and mediums the cameras used. Some used mini optical discs to record their media, and others used SXS flash memory cards, which are still being used today in the world of broadcast. The PDW F350 was one of the most popular cameras in the XDcam line, and it cost $7,200 or $12,200 adjusted for inflation. Size-wise, there were a lot of sacrifices, with most of the XDcam cameras sporting an ENG-style camera body that was really more at home in the broadcast world. The big advantage brought with this generation was the ability for XDcam cameras to record higher bitrate media, which meant that frame rates like 60p and higher resolutions like HD were now possible, which was huge, and it was a big jump from DVcam SD. Where DVcam was great for news and docs, XDcam was the generation where cinematography could really start to flourish. In the 2000s, more filmmakers started to choose XDcam over film for their productions. But while XDcam was a leap forward for professional broadcast, these cameras still used relatively small sensors, often half an inch or 2/3 of an inch. The cinema look was still mostly locked behind expensive, large sensor cinema cameras like Sony's high-end Cine Alta series. That's right, running in parallel to DVcam and XDcam systems was Sony's most exclusive cinema line of cameras, Cine Alta. Cine Alta was, and still is, Sony's flagship camera label, representing the pinnacle of what the brand can accomplish in video recording technology. Cine Alta is a portmanteau of cinematography and the Latin word for high, alta. So you know Sony means business when they talk about their high cinema cameras, or their cinema high cameras. The first Cine Alta camera came out in 1999, and it was called the HDW F900. Instead of a single 2/3-inch sensor, the HDW F900 used 3 2/3-inch sensors to capture a full HD image, which provided a cinematic look that XDcam cameras simply could not compete with. It also came with a high cost. The HDW F900 cost $82,000 new, or $153,000 adjusted for inflation. Not surprisingly, they were not a great option for most people due to this price, but it was a sign that high-end, film-less digital cinematography was on the horizon. Sony just had to figure out a way to make it cheaper. In 2008, Sony released the PMW EX1, another compact camcorder-style video camera that used, hey look at that, 3 1/2-inch CMOS sensors. This combination of sensors was still smaller than Super 35 when all put together, but they were larger than the 1/3-inch sensors that lower-cost camcorders were using at the time. After the launch of the XDcam and Cine Alta lines, demand had been growing for smaller, cinema-adjacent cameras, a vacuum that Sony would address with the PMW EX line. With its compact form factor and one-man band style operation, the PMW line was much more similar to today's modern run-and-gun cameras. Despite still being labeled as cameras for newsrooms, indie filmmakers flocked to this new line from Sony. The PMW EX3 was a compact digital camcorder with a robust optical viewfinder, XLR inputs, and interchangeable lens system. It could shoot HD video at 60p, which was revolutionary for the time. And because of its slightly larger sensor size, you could get a shallower depth of field. Sony would later release an updated version, the PMW F3, the brand's first true digital cinema camera to shoot with a Super 35mm sensor. And here we start to see more similarities between these cameras and the modern FX line. Released in 2010 for around $8,000 or $12,000 when adjusted for inflation, the PMW F3 was a workhorse for those looking to shoot in digital cinema. The price was substantially lower than Sony's Cine Alta cameras at the time, and what you got for that price was truly extraordinary. The F3, as it was nicknamed, offered many hallmarks of professional digital cinema, including PL mount support, long GOP capability, and 10-bit 422 external recording. It had HD SDI ports and could record an S-Log, which is everyone's favorite. Sony was also experimenting with a more boxy style camera body in the F3. Sure, it still looked like a camcorder, but you could tell that Sony's design philosophy was starting to change. While it might look dated by today's standards, the F3 was a big step forward for Sony. The company was really taking its first serious steps at bridging the gap between its top-tier digital cameras and its affordable, high-quality video cameras for budget-oriented filmmakers. In 2011, Sony released another important camera, which was also kind of shaped like a brick. That camera was the NEX FS100, a $5,000, $7,300 when adjusted for inflation, E-mount camera with a Super 35mm sensor. This was the birth of the FS series of cameras, a very important camera line to the lineage of Sony cinema cameras. And just like that, Sony customers shopping for cameras now had a modular camcorder with an interchangeable lens system, decent low light performance, and a relatively compact body, all at a relatively reasonable price. This camera found a home immediately with indie filmmakers, wedding videographers, and event shooters, really anyone who craved that cinematic look that a Super 35mm sensor could provide. 1 year later, in 2012, Sony doubled down on the FS line with the NEX FS700, an absolute beast of a machine and one of the most interesting camera designs Sony has ever released. One of the most groundbreaking features of the NEX FS700 was its ability to output 4K RAW video to an external recorder, an absolutely unheard of feature for $6,000 or $8,400 when adjusted for inflation. It also introduced high frame rate recording for slow motion enthusiasts, able to record up to 240 frames per second. The FS700 became a staple on music videos and action shoots where slow motion was the king. So, in the early 2010s, Sony had amassed some serious credibility in the Super 35 budget cinema camera world, which was important because it would pave the way for the real heavy hitters of the FS series, the legendary FS5 and FS7. In 2014, Sony solidified the FS series in the hearts and minds of filmmakers with the launch of the PXW FS7, or the FS7 as it was shortened to. This camera combined everything filmmakers loved about the FS700, the super 35mm sensor, the slow motion capabilities, internal ND, pro outputs, pro body design, but also added professional codecs like XAVC, internal 4K recording, which was huge, and a more ergonomic, shoulder-friendly design. It was by far the best choice for professional video shooters inside the Sony ecosystem. The camera became a staple for documentaries, corporate work, and even narrative production. The FS7 was a smash success. Soon after, Sony launched the FS5 in 2015, offering a smaller, more portable version of that package with a built-in electronic variable ND. Now there's a reason the FS7 and the FS5 had such a huge following. They represented flexibility and affordability while delivering a broadcast-friendly codec and a wide dynamic range. They were essentially the Swiss Army knives of production for that type of camera, suitable for everything from weddings to full-blown Netflix documentaries. The FS7 and the FS5 would see refreshed versions launched in 2017 and 2018 respectively, and these are cameras that I still see on productions to this day. Meanwhile, Sony's higher-end Cine Alta division was cooking up its own innovations. The Sony Venice, introduced in 2017, was a full-frame digital cinema camera featuring top-tier color science, dual base ISO, and robust internal recording formats like XOCN. It also shot with a 6K sensor, which would become a lot more popular. This was a big shift for Sony's Pro Cinema lineup, which had mostly been shooting on super 35mm sensors. By going full frame, Venice signaled a new standard for Sony. Bigger sensors, more dynamic range, and better color reproduction. Filmmakers took notice, and so did Sony's mid-range development teams, making cameras for people like you and me. Which brings us back to 2019 when Sony released the FX9 as a replacement for the outgoing FS7 Mark II, followed by the FX6 as a replacement for the outgoing FS5 Mark II in 2020. The FX3 was launched in 2021, the FX30 in 2022, and the Burano in 2024. Which kind of brings me back to the philosophy of the FX line. The FX line is a combination of some of the best features from Venice packed into more affordable models which themselves are the product of small incremental improvements honed through decades of progress on indie sets and broadcast productions. This synergy between the high-end Cine Alta platform and the mid-range production cameras is key to understanding why the FX series resonates so strongly with filmmakers today. So, the next time you pick up an FX3 or an FX6 or even the mighty FX9, remember that you're holding on to a piece of history, one shaped by generations of cameras that came before it. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you very much. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into cameras that inspired the Sony FX line. If you found this video helpful or entertaining, be sure to let me know in the comments, and I'd love to hear your experience with some of the older Sony cameras. Did you ever shoot on a PD150 or an EX1, or are you still using an FS7 or an FX6 or whatever you're shooting on? Let me know down in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll make sure to read yours as well. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, hit the subscribe, and tap the notification bell, all that stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and I appreciate you very much, and I'll see you in the next video.